Laura Loomer, Trump ally, self-styled firebrand, and professional provocateur, had unleashed a tirade so charged, so racially barbed, that even veteran reporters blinked in disbelief as they replayed the footage. Her words, aimed squarely at Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas, carried not just insult, but venom. It was the kind of attack that left no room for ambiguity. This wasn't political disagreement. This was a racist assault, broadcast in the digital square for millions to witness. Within hours, Crockett erupted. She was not a stranger to confrontation. Known in Congress for her sharp retorts and fearless presence in hearings, she had made a reputation as one of the chamber's most fiery voices. But this time was different. This wasn't about policy disputes or partisan wrangling. This was personal, an attack that cut to identity itself. And Crockett responded with the fury of someone who knew the stakes went beyond her own name. At a hastily called press conference under the fluorescent glare of Capitol lights, Crockett's voice was steady but electric. We cannot allow racism to masquerade as commentary. We cannot allow hate to parade as free speech. This is not just about me. This is about every voice they've tried to silence, every community they've tried to degrade. And I promise you I will not be silent. The words ricocheted through newsrooms and social media timelines. Hashtags flared. Number Stand with Crockett. Number Loomer exposed. Number Racism unleashed. Commentators scrambled to contextualize the moment. Pundits weighed in, and the digital storm swelled. Is less than #0. 3 is greater than. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. Who is Laura Loomer? To understand the shock, one must understand the messenger. Loomer is no stranger to controversy. Banned from multiple social media platforms for incendiary remarks, she has long thrived on the currency of outrage. In Trump's orbit, she has been both embraced and disavowed to extreme for some strategists, yet too valuable as a provocateur to cast aside completely. Her brand is spectacle. Storming stages, hijacking conversations, turning insults into headlines. For Loomer, attention has always been the prize, and chaos the weapon. Yet even by her standards, this attack was a line crossed. Laura Loomer has made a career out of living on the edge of acceptability, one media analyst observed. But this wasn't the edge. This was the plunge. Crockett, a rising force. By contrast, Jasmine Crockett's rise has been meteoric. A freshman Democrat from Texas, she has carved out a reputation as unflinchingly direct, often sparring with Republican colleagues in hearings where tempers flare hotter than the cameras can capture. Her supporters hail her as a truth-teller, unafraid to call out hypocrisy. Her critics accuse her of grandstanding, but no one denies her presence. And that presence made Loomer's attack all the more charged. This wasn't a random target. This was a rising figure in American politics. A black woman whose growing influence in Congress had already rattled some corners of the establishment. Loomer's words, dripping with contempt, were more than insult. They were a challenge, an attempt to diminish, to discredit, to wound. But instead of diminishing Crockett, they elevated her. The cinematic moment. The press conference itself felt almost cinematic. Crockett, framed by the marble columns of the Capitol, her eyes fixed directly on the cameras, her words slicing through the humid Washington air. Behind her, supporters and staffers stood rigid, their silence amplifying the weight of every syllable she spoke. Even the pauses mattered. The slight tightening of her jaw, the momentary glance downward before lifting her gaze again. Viewers described it as watching a storm form in real time. First the rumble, then the strike. Cable networks cut into their programming. Social media feeds flooded with clips. Comment sections became battlegrounds, with supporters praising Crockett's strength and detractors scrambling to defend Loomer's free speech. The battle lines were drawn. Questions without answers. And then came the questions, swirling like smoke from the blast. Why did Loomer choose this moment to launch her attack? Was this an impulsive outburst, or a coordinated strike, timed to distract, to provoke, to dominate headlines? Who benefits from Crockett being cast in the crosshairs? Trump? Loomer herself? Or shadowy strategists testing the waters of how far the rhetoric could go? Each question deepened the mystery, fueling the sense that this was not just another controversy. It was a signal, a glimpse into the playbook of chaos that has so often defined Trump's allies. A nation reacts. Across the country, the reactions were as polarized as the politics that define them. Civil rights groups condemned Loomer, calling for her to be disavowed not only by Trump, but by every figure in his orbit. Editorial boards wrote impassioned pieces about the corrosive impact of racism in political discourse. Meanwhile, far-right influencers doubled down, amplifying Loomer's remarks as brutal truth-telling. Some mocked Crockett's outrage. Others framed her response as proof that the left can't take criticism. The divide was not just political. It was cultural, moral, existential. Was America prepared to confront the persistence of racism in its politics? Or would it continue to excuse it as just another flavor of free speech? You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. Loomer's silence and Trump's shadow. As the storm grew, Loomer herself retreated into silence, refusing interviews, offering no apology, yet her absence spoke volumes. The silence allowed speculation to fester. Was she under pressure from Trump's team to quiet down? Was this a test balloon gone wrong? Or was she simply savoring the chaos, letting others do the talking? Trump, true to form, said nothing, at least publicly. But sources inside his circle whispered of unease. Loomer, they admitted, was both asset and liability. Her ability to rile up the base was undeniable, but her propensity to cross lines threatened to stain the very brand she claimed to serve. A pressing mystery. By the week's end, the story showed no signs of fading. If anything, it deepened. Journalists uncovered past Loomer's statements that echoed the same racial undertones, resurfacing controversies she had hoped were buried. Crockett doubled down, using the moment not only to defend herself, but to call for a reckoning in American politics. We cannot normalize this. We cannot shrug and move on. If we do, we invite more of it. And if we invite more of it, then the cost will not be mine alone. It will be ours as a nation. The words landed with prophetic weight. And once again, the questions returned. Was this moment an aberration, or a harbinger of what lies ahead in a campaign season already brimming with division? If you're following this clash of power and prejudice, remember this is only the opening act. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, because what comes next may reveal not just Loomer's motives, but the very fault lines of American democracy. The storm did not pass. It thickened. By the second week, Loomer's words were no longer a single clip. They had become a weapon, sharpened and hurled across platforms, dissected in podcasts, replayed on cable, dissected again in op-eds. And everywhere, the same image repeated. Jasmine Crockett, standing defiant under the Capitol dome, refusing to yield, her voice turning insult into indictment. Laura Loomer has built a career not on policies or legislation. She holds no office, but on provocation. To her detractors, she is a chaos agent. To her fans, a fearless truth-teller. But to anyone who has studied her methods closely, she operates less like a politician and more like a performance artist of outrage. Every move fits into a larger strategy, a playbook she has refined over years of online skirmishes, stage invasions, and viral clips. At its core, Loomer's playbook is about three things: shock, amplification, and retreat. The opening gambit is always the same. Say the unsayable. Loomer thrives on lines others won't cross. Whether it's interrupting events with shouted accusations or unleashing tirades laced with conspiracy theories, she understands that in a media environment saturated with noise, only the most outrageous signals break through. The attack on Jasmine Crockett followed this pattern with chilling precision. Loomer didn't just critique Crockett's politics. She went for identity race, knowing full well the wound it would open and the headlines it would generate. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't clever. And it certainly wasn't accidental. It was shock deployed as a weapon. Loomer knows that if she can make you gasp, she's already won half the battle, one former strategist remarked. The content matters less than the reaction. Outrage is the oxygen she breathes. But shock alone doesn't sustain attention. What comes next is the echo chamber. Loomer has cultivated a network of sympathetic influencers, fringe platforms, and far-right voices who eagerly seize on her provocations. The moment she lights the match, others fan the flames. Tweets become hashtags. Hashtags become segments on sympathetic talk shows. Soon, The original insult is no longer a lone remark. It's a cultural flashpoint. In Crockett's case, the clip circulated within minutes. Partisan blogs reposted it with glee, framing Loomer as a warrior, exposing liberal fragility. Memes sprouted overnight, each one mocking Crockett's outrage as overreaction. What Loomer had done with a few sentences became, through amplification, an entire media cycle. It was not accidental. She understands the viral economy, explained a digital culture analyst. The clip is just the seed. The network she's built does the rest. And then comes the silence, the most misunderstood piece of the playbook. After the initial detonation and amplification, Loomer often retreats. She declines interviews. She avoids clarifying. She lets the chaos swirl without her direct involvement. This retreat serves two purposes. First, it denies critics the satisfaction of immediate rebuttal. They are left shouting into a void, their fury unreciprocated. Second, it transforms the controversy into a spectacle others must carry. Pundits debate, allies defend, opponents condemn. Meanwhile, Loomer hovers above it all, untouched, waiting for the next opening. After her tirade against Crockett, she followed this formula perfectly. The silence that followed was not absence, it was strategy. By refusing to explain or apologize, Loomer forced the public to do the work for her. Every debate show that asked, "What did she mean?" kept her name alive. Every article dissecting her silence extended the lifespan of the controversy. Performance as politics. To some, Loomer resembles less a political actor than a performance artist whose stage is chaos itself. She has stormed Broadway shows, interrupted political rallies, and filmed herself being dragged away, all with the same goal: to create an image that travels faster than nuance. Her critics argue she is unserious, a clownish figure whose antics undermine democracy. But dismissing her as mere clownery underestimates the sophistication of her playbook. Outrage politics is not accidental. It is engineered. Loomer is playing a game most of her critics don't even realize exists, noted one media professor. They respond with facts, with outrage, with condemnation, all of which only feeds the cycle. She doesn't need to win arguments. She only needs to dominate attention. Her alliance with Donald Trump only supercharges the playbook. Trump himself has long mastered the art of provocation: tweet first, dominate the cycle, retreat into ambiguity. Loomer's methods are, in many ways, an echo of his. Their partnership is less about ideology than about shared tactics. For Trump, Loomer represents a useful megaphone to energize the base. For Loomer, Trump provides the legitimacy that keeps her from being dismissed entirely as a fringe provocateur. Together, they form a feedback loop of chaos, one that rewards spectacle over substance. Which brings us back to Jasmine Crockett. Why target her? Analysts point to several reasons. First, she is a rising star, and stars attract attacks. Second, as a black woman in politics, she represents precisely the kind of figure Loomer's playbook thrives on. Someone whose identity can be weaponized for maximum shock. Third, Crockett's fiery personality guaranteed a strong response, which would only feed the cycle further. It was, in short, the perfect setup. But every playbook has its risks. Loomer's reliance on shock means she must constantly escalate. Each provocation must outdo the last, or risk being ignored. And in this escalation lies danger, not just for Loomer, but for those who orbit her. The attack on Crockett may have followed the script, but the backlash suggested the limits of the tactic. Crockett didn't fold. She fought back, reframing the moment as proof of systemic racism. Instead of silencing her, Loomer amplified her. For the first time, the playbook seemed to backfire. The final irony of Loomer's playbook is that while it thrives on the illusion of control, provocation, amplification, retreat, it is ultimately a gamble. She lights fires, but she cannot always dictate where the flames spread. Her attack on Crockett may have set the stage for headlines, but it also elevated Crockett's profile, rallied supporters, and exposed the cynical mechanics of outrage politics to a broader public. As one commentator quipped, Loomer wanted to write the script. Instead, she handed Crockett the pen. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. Crockett was not content with one press conference. She launched what observers quickly dubbed a counteroffensive: interviews on primetime slots, appearances on late-night shows, town halls in her district, where she repeated her message that racism in politics was not a bug, but a feature, a tactic used to silence, distract, and degrade. The cinematic quality of her campaign was undeniable. At one town hall in Dallas, Crockett stood before a crowd of hundreds, a giant American flag behind her. Cameras caught the moment she declared, voice rising above the cheers, is less than #0. 3 is greater than. I am not afraid of Laura Loomer. I am not afraid of Donald Trump. And I am certainly not afraid of the truth. The clip went viral. Hashtags surged again, this time not in outrage, but in solidarity. Number Fearless Crockett. Number Truth over Hate. Number We Stand Together. It was as if the attack had cracked open a reservoir of frustration, and Crockett had given it language. Inside Republican circles, Loomer's outburst triggered quiet panic. Strategists, always wary of messaging discipline, whispered that her tirade had crossed a line that could not be walked back. Some worried it would cost votes in swing districts. Others shrugged it off as Loomer being Loomer. But the silence was telling. Few dared to publicly condemn her. The Trump orbit, already teetering under its own controversies, seemed paralyzed. Loomer, after all, was not just a fringe figure. She was part of the base's bloodstream, loud, loyal, and relentless. To disavow her risked alienating supporters. To embrace her risked further backlash. So the GOP chose the most dangerous option: silence. Meanwhile, online, the fire spread. TikTok clips of Loomer's tirade were remixed with historical footage of segregationists, drawing stark parallels. Memes mocked her silence in the aftermath, images of Loomer's face, photoshopped onto empty chairs, captioned, "Still hiding." But perhaps the most powerful content came not from influencers, but from ordinary citizens. Black mothers filmed themselves speaking directly to Crockett, thanking her for refusing to be silenced. Young voters recorded reaction videos, their voices shaking with anger, pledging to fight like Crockett. Night is out. The attack had metastasized into movement. Then came the leaks. First, an audio recording surfaced, allegedly from a closed-door meeting of Trump allies. In it, a voice resembling Loomer's boasted that her attack had set the libs on fire and given Jasmine more attention than she can handle. The tone was cavalier, almost gleeful, as if the racial venom were nothing more than political theater. Second, a memo leaked from inside a GOP consultancy firm. It warned bluntly, associations with Loomer risk alienating moderates. Damage control must prioritize distance while maintaining base enthusiasm. The document, dry and clinical, confirmed what many suspected, that Loomer's outburst was not just offensive, but strategically toxic. When these leaks hit the underground newsroom, yes, the same renegade platform now haunting moguls, they seized them instantly. Maddow dissected the memo with icy precision. Colbert mocked the audio with a parody reenactment, shaking his head in disbelief. Kimmel, face somber, said simply, "If this is their strategy, then racism isn't a bug in the system. It's the system." The clip detonated across feeds. The crescendo came not in a studio but in the marble hallways of the Capitol. Reporters jostled as Crockett strode past, her pace brisk, her expression steeled. Then, suddenly, Loomer appeared flanked by cameras, her lips curved into a smirk. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Two figures, one embodying defiance, the other reveling in chaos, standing just feet apart. "Congresswoman, care to repeat what you said about me on TV?" Loomer shouted, her voice echoing under the dome. Crockett stopped, turned, and with the cameras rolling, she delivered her line. "I don't need to repeat myself, Laura. The whole country already heard me." The hallway erupted, reporters shouting questions, aides scrambling, the footage racing onto live feeds within minutes. It was confrontation as theater, and America could not look away. Traditional networks, trapped in their reflex of balance, fumbled. One anchor asked whether Crockett's response was too fiery. Another speculated that Loomer's remarks were being misinterpreted. The attempts at neutrality rang hollow, mocked mercilessly online. The both sides machine is broken, one columnist wrote. You can't balance racism with rhetoric. There is no middle ground between hate and humanity. But the moguls, terrified of alienating viewers, persisted. Their awkward dance only fueled the underground newsroom's appeal, where authenticity trumped caution. Then came the revelation that transformed outrage into scandal. Documents obtained by investigative journalists suggested Loomer's tirade was not spontaneous. Emails showed coordination with a small circle of Trump world operatives, strategizing how to rattle Crockett and bait her into overexposure. Loomer's words, dripping with racism, may have been more than provocation. They may have been planned. The emails included chilling phrases. Crockett is too loud, cut her down to size. Another, race card will play in our favor with the base. When this evidence surfaced, the narrative shifted again. Loomer was no longer a rogue agent. She was potentially a pawn, or worse, a partner in a calculated attempt to weaponize racism for political gain. Crockett seized on the revelation in a blistering speech on the House floor. This wasn't just an insult. This was a strategy to dehumanize, to divide, to distract. And if we allow it, then we are complicit in letting hate masquerade as politics. Her words rose to a crescendo, filling the chamber with an energy that cameras struggled to capture. It was not just rebuttal. It was indictment. By now, Loomer's silence had turned from strategy to liability. Even some Trump allies began to edge away, their statements carefully worded, but unmistakable. Laura Loomer does not represent our campaign. Yet, the damage was done. For Crockett, the moment was transformative. She was no longer simply the target of a racist attack. She had become a national figure, a symbol of resilience, a rallying point for those demanding accountability in politics. For Loomer, it was the opposite. Once celebrated for her chaos, she now looked like a liability. Her outburst exposed as both morally bankrupt and strategically disastrous. And for the GOP moguls, watching from their towers, the fear deepened that this controversy had not only elevated Crockett, but revealed the rot at the heart of their playbook. If you followed this far, you know this is more than a feud. It's a battle for what kind of politics America will tolerate. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to see how this story ends, because in the next chapter, we'll find out whether Crockett's eruption marks a turning point or just the opening salvo of something bigger. If Loomer had the playbook of chaos, Jasmine Crockett had the counterplay of fire and focus. Where Loomer relied on provocation, Crockett wielded resilience. Where Loomer baited, Crockett reframed. Her counteroffensive was not improvised outrage. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign to turn insult into momentum and venom into visibility. Crockett's initial press conference had set the tone. Steady, sharp, unyielding. But rather than letting the cycle fade, as many politicians might when advised by cautious consultants, she doubled down. She treated Loomer's attack not as an isolated insult, but as a case study in the persistence of racism in American politics. By the second day, Crockett was everywhere. Morning shows, podcasts, primetime interviews. She repeated her central message with disciplined clarity. This isn't about me. It's about the system that allows people like Laura Loomer to weaponize hate for attention. If we normalize this, we normalize the degradation of democracy itself. The repetition was deliberate. Each platform became another amplifier, not of Loomer's slur, but of Crockett's defiance. Crockett's genius was in refusing to stay framed as a victim. Instead, she positioned herself as a symbol, an avatar for everyone who had endured prejudice, insult, or dismissal. At rallies in Texas, she spoke directly to constituents who told her stories of discrimination at work, in schools, in daily life. You've lived this, she told them. You've seen this. What Loomer said to me, they've said to you. And when I stand up to her, I'm standing up with you. In Showcase, you're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. The crowd roared. Clips of these moments spread far beyond her district. Civil rights groups amplified them. Influencers paired them with historical footage of leaders who had faced similar attacks. Crockett, once just another Democratic freshman in Congress, was now framed as part of a long lineage of defiance. Crockett's counteroffensive had a cinematic flair. She knew how to use optics as well as words. At one town hall in Dallas, Cameras captured her framed against a giant American flag, her hand raised as she declared, "They want to make me small, but I will not shrink, and neither should you." The image went viral. Memes appeared, not mocking her but celebrating her. One depicted her standing tall, while shadows of segregationists tried in vain to pull her down. Another showed her with the caption, "Louder than hate." It was the kind of cultural resonance Loomer could never manufacture, because it wasn't engineered for chaos. It was built on authenticity. Online, Crockett's team ran a parallel campaign. They clipped her sharpest lines, polished them into 30-second bursts, and flooded TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Instead of waiting for mainstream networks to cover her, they bypassed them entirely. Hashtags like #FearlessCrockett and #TruthOverHate surged. Young voters, many disengaged from cable politics, shared her clips not as political content but as motivational reels. Crockett's anger was not seen as performative. It was relatable. The righteous indignation of someone finally saying what others had long held back. Crockett turned a racist insult into a rallying cry, one analyst noted. That's not just damage control. That's political jujitsu. The defining moment of her counteroffensive came in the marble hallways of Congress. Loomer, perhaps emboldened by cameras, appeared to confront her. Smirk painted across her face. Reporters leaned in. Aides froze. "Congresswoman, care to repeat what you said about me?" Loomer shouted, voice dripping with mockery. Crockett stopped mid-step. She turned, eyes steady, and delivered her line like a dagger wrapped in velvet. "I don't need to repeat myself, Laura. The whole country already heard me." The moment was pure cinema. In less than 10 seconds, Crockett had distilled her entire counteroffensive. Loomer might scream, but Crockett's words echoed louder. The clip dominated news cycles. Even anchors hesitant to take sides acknowledged the sharpness of the exchange. Online, it was replayed millions of times, each replay reinforcing Crockett's transformation from target to titan. What made Crockett's counteroffensive so effective was her refusal to remain reactive. She didn't just defend herself, she expanded the battlefield. On the House floor, she delivered a blistering speech. This was not an accident, this was a strategy. Racism has always been a strategy. To divide us, to distract us, to demean us. But we are done playing their game. Applause thundered through the chamber. Her words were clipped and replayed in classrooms, church gatherings, and civic meetings. By reframing Loomer's attack as systemic rather than personal, Crockett ensured that her response could not be dismissed as mere sensitivity. It was indictment. Of course, the counteroffensive carried risks. Some pundits accused her of milking the moment, of elevating Loomer's platform by engaging. Others warned that her fiery style might alienate moderates, who preferred quieter tones. But Crockett seemed unfazed. "Silence protects no one," she told an interviewer. "If my voice makes them uncomfortable, maybe they should ask why they're comfortable with racism in the first place." The bluntness resonated. For every critic, there were thousands rallying to her side. Donations to her campaign spiked. Her national profile soared. In the span of weeks, Crockett's counteroffensive had rewritten her political story. She was no longer just a first-term congresswoman from Texas. She was a national figure, a voice of resistance, a lightning rod for debates about race, politics, and power. And in turning Loomer's insult into fuel, she exposed the limits of the chaos playbook. Provocation might spark outrage, but it could not outlast conviction. As one observer put it, Loomer started a fire. Crockett built a torch. The dust had not settled. It had only thickened into a fog, where every step felt uncertain. What began as one woman's tirade had spiraled into a cultural reckoning, and the echoes could be heard far beyond the Capitol dome. Laura Loomer had set her trap with the familiar mechanics of her playbook: shock, amplification, retreat. But this time the formula misfired. Instead of diminishing her target, she elevated her. Instead of framing Jasmine Crockett as a victim, she inadvertently made her a symbol. And so the question lingered in every newsroom, every campaign office, every late-night strategy call. Had the politics of outrage finally met its match? From their glass towers in Manhattan and their gated compounds in Florida, media moguls watched uneasily. For years, they had profited from the outrage economy, feeding the public spectacle after spectacle, convinced that chaos was currency. But Crockett's rise suggested a different possibility, that authenticity could outlast provocation, that defiance could outshine hate. Networks tried to spin. Some downplayed Loomer's comments, framing them as controversial rather than racist. Others hedged with panels designed to debate both sides. But the audience wasn't buying it. The clips that dominated weren't from cautious anchors. They were from Crockett herself, raw and unfiltered. Once again, power seemed to be slipping from the boardrooms into the hands of those who dared to speak without permission. For Jasmine Crockett, the counter-offensive had transformed her image. She was no longer just a freshman congresswoman, learning the ropes of Washington. She had become, in the public eye, a warrior. The insults meant to wound her had instead branded her as a voice of resistance, not just for her district, but for anyone who had felt silenced. The cinematic power of her response, press conferences, town halls, the hallway confrontation, became part of a larger narrative arc. She wasn't simply answering Loomer. She was reframing the role of a black woman in American politics, refusing to be a footnote, insisting on being the headline. Her opponents called it theater. Her supporters called it survival. Either way, it was effective. And one of Laura Loomer, the retreat that had once been her strength, now resembled weakness. Silence, which once amplified the chaos she left behind, now seemed like evasion. Leaks suggested even Trump's orbit was tiring of her volatility. Strategists worried she was more liability than asset. Yet those who know Loomer warn against underestimation. She thrives in the shadows, one analyst cautioned. She'll re-emerge, she always does. The only question is where and with what level of escalation. If Crockett had turned her into a symbol of desperation, Loomer was determined not to stay there. The playbook, after all, rewards persistence. Beyond the personal clash, the nation was left grappling with deeper questions. What does it mean when racism is deployed, not as accident, but as strategy? Can democracy survive when outrage becomes the most valuable political currency? And when someone like Crockett seizes the insult and turns it into fuel, is that victory or just another cycle in a never-ending storm? In classrooms, on talk shows, in church basements, these questions echoed. Loomer and Crockett had become avatars in a larger debate, not just about politics, but about the soul of the country. Picture it: Washington at dusk, the Capitol dome glowing against the fading sky. Inside, Crockett walks the marbled hallways, her staff buzzing around her, her phone lighting up with messages of support. Across the country, Loomer sits in silence, her next move hidden, her smirk replaced by calculation. Above them both, the media towers hum, executives pacing, unsure whether to amplify or ignore, terrified of losing control either way. And in millions of living rooms, Americans scroll, watch, comment, argue, participating in the spectacle whether they choose to or not. It is a tableau of modern politics, messy, cinematic, unresolved. Will Crockett's eruption mark the beginning of a new era, where authenticity trumps outrage? Or will Loomer, armed with her playbook, return with something darker, sharper, more destabilizing than before? No one knows. And perhaps that is the truest reflection of American politics today, not clarity, but constant suspense. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. Crockett herself seemed to embrace the uncertainty. In her final public comment on the controversy, she offered not closure, but a challenge. This is bigger than me. It's bigger than Laura Loomer. The question is not whether I can withstand the hate. The question is whether America can refuse to normalize it. That answer is not mine to give, it's yours. Her words hung in the air like a verdict, waiting to be delivered. So what do you think? Are we watching the twilight of the outrage machine? Or just the prelude to its next, more dangerous chapter? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following every revelation, every clash, every sleepless night, in this unfolding drama, like, share, and subscribe. Because the reckoning is far from over.